My daughter-in-law enjoyed referring to me as the housekeeper. She had no idea that this housekeeper actually owned the home they resided in, the vehicle she used daily, and the comfortable life she assumed was hers forever. So, I chose to give her a crash course in real estate responsibilities. I presented her with the keys to her fresh start, along with the accompanying loan payment. If you agree that respect must be gained rather than assumed, give this a thumbs up, sign up for more, and share in the comments your location. The quiet in the kitchen hung thick, interrupted solely by the gentle tap of dishes on the stone surface as I arranged another one. It was long after midnight, and my house had at last grown calm. The final traces of chuckles from my son David and his wife Sophia's guests had vanished hours earlier, leaving a chaos of drained goblets, stained dishes, and wrinkled serviettes. They had retired to sleep 60 minutes before, entrusting the tidying to the steady buzz of the washer and to me. My eyes wandered to the vacant seat at the table's end, the spot my departed wife Emily always claimed. She would have ensured the kitchen never reached such disarray. This residence, with its every smooth plank and shining counter, was her creation. Now, it resembled a lodge where I served as the constant, uncompensated employee. The faint steps descending the staircase drew me from my reverie. Sophia emerged in the entrance, clad in a satin wrap, her features lit by her device's screen. She glanced at me, then at the partially tidied surface, a slight, apathetic scowl on her mouth. "Oh, Forrest," she uttered, her tone sleek and remote. "You needn't bother with that. Simply let the cleaners handle it tomorrow." The phrase was offhand, yet it struck like small, jagged pebbles. The cleaners. She phrased it as though I were an outsider in my domain, a kind visitor lingering too long. She perceived no parent, no proprietor, no builder of the enterprise that supported the very drinks she and her companions had so thoughtlessly savored. She viewed a convenience. I remained silent. I merely inclined my head, resuming my task at the basin, scouring a persistent mark from a fine tumbler. The ensuing quiet was her conquest. She poured a tumbler of purified water from the cooler, savored a refined gulp, and ascended once more without further comment. I remained solitary amid the disorder, the recollections, and the increasing cold of invisibility. A couple of days on, I sat in my office attempting to organize some of Emily's ancient planting diaries when David and Sophia came to me. They displayed rehearsed, sincere looks that I recognized as the lead-in to a plea for funds. Sophia clutched a shiny pamphlet, which she set on my workstation with flair. It promoted the Willowbrook Country Club, renowned more for its steep entry costs than its putting greens. "Dad," David started, his gaze evading mine. "Sophia and I figured it could boost my job prospects if we became members." Sophia swiftly assumed control, her speech laced with planned zeal. "It's all networking. Forrest, the folks David must wow are all there. It's not merely a cost. It's a stake in our tomorrow, in the clan's tomorrow." I examined the cost list. The startup charge alone exceeded the initial deposit on my debut dwelling. A known exhaustion enveloped me. It was perpetually a venture, perpetually for the kin, but the gains never appeared. I regarded my offspring, a fellow of 32 who still conversed like a lad seeking a bigger stipend. "David," I stated, my timbre even, "are you certain you'll find moments to utilize such a membership? Your duties already seem demanding." He fidgeted, groping for a reply. "Well, one must carve out time for these matters." "Dad." "It's vital," Sophia interjected fluidly, resting a palm on David's limb. "Naturally, he will. We'll prioritize it. Consider the links. Forrest, the suppers, the gatherings. It will raise our whole clan's status." I realized debate was futile. Refusal would yield days of sulking, subtle hostility, and a tense vibe turning my abode into a jail. It was simpler to authorize the payment. I was buying tranquility, not golf. Fine, I declared, retrieving my ledger from the compartment. I'll cover the entry charge. Sophia's expression beamed with victorious glee. She bent and pecked my face. Thanks, Forrest. You're wonderful. You won't rue this. David muttered, thanks, Dad, his ease evident. As they departed, I overheard Sophia on her device, thrilled, relaying the update to a contact. I stared at the ledger in my grasp. It seemed less a means of kindness and more a tether one they gripped tightly. The serenity I had acquired felt exorbitantly priced. The ultimate trigger, the one shattering my subdued endurance, arrived 7 days later. I had devoted the afternoon at Emily's resting place, a serene custom that invariably offered solace. Upon returning, the initial observation was the alteration in the lounge. It appeared brighter, noisier, and barer. The expansive, tailor-made rack that stored Emily's assortment of timeless novels, her delight and treasure, was absent. Instead, a colossal wall-hung screen, at least 75 inches across, commanded the area. Its surface was dark and slick, mirroring a warped rendition of the space, a foreign space. I lingered there, keys yet in my fist, sensing a deep disorientation. My pulse quickened slightly. I approached the former site of the rack, brushing the barrier as if verifying its reality. I noted the subtle marks in the coating where the ledges had resided for over 35 years. Sophia entered from the galley, singing softly, a blend in her grip. She spotted me and grinned widely, unaware of the turmoil brewing within. "How does it look?" she inquired, motioning to the screen with her vessel. "It truly expands the area. Right makes it far more contemporary and ideal for hosting." She expressed it with such relaxed assurance, as if she had merely repositioned cushions. No discussion, no debate, not even a brief notice. It was an edict. I held back my response initially. I strove for composure. "Where are the volumes, Sophia?" I eventually questioned. "Oh," she replied, flicking a disregarding hand. "They're secure. We shifted them to the storage in the cellar. They were collecting dust anyhow, and frankly, no one perused them." No one perused them. The phrase reverberated in my thoughts. I observed her, this lady who had so easily obliterated a key element of my spouse, of my past, substituting it with a lifeless dark panel. I uttered no more. I pivoted and descended to the cellar. There they lay. Emily's volumes, not meticulously stored, but piled randomly in grimy cartons in a shadowy nook. I traced the edge of an aged edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, its binding frayed from innumerable reeds. In that instant, amid the chill, faint glow of the cellar, I recognized the unspoken battle for my domain had commenced, and I could no longer remain a dormant fighter. The eating area was arranged like a glossy spread, a lengthy oak board, buffed to a reflective sheen, echoed the soft, intentional radiance of the glass fixture overhead. Each utensil, each blade, each chalice was impeccably positioned. Sophia had demanded the nuptial porcelain dishes with fine silver edges we typically reserved for holidays like Thanksgiving or Independence Day. A grand, artistic cluster of ivory roses occupied the middle, their dense, pleasant aroma saturating the atmosphere with a somber fragrance. It was a display of affluence, of flawless household bliss, and I understood my part was not the conductor, but a backstage hand. Sophia's folks, William and Margaret, faced me. William was a gentleman who bore his achievements like a custom outfit, costly and somewhat snug. He possessed a solid grip and an evaluating stare that appeared to appraise the worth of all it touched. Margaret was his ideal match. Slender and graceful, with precisely arranged locks and a grin that seldom touched her icy azure gaze, they conversed in refined accents about their latest voyage to Napa Valley, the issues with their garden designer, and the escalating dues at their sailing society. My offspring David sat next to Sophia, affirming eagerly, chortling overly boisterously at William's quips. He strived intensely to captivate them, to blend into their realm of effortless splendor. He resembled a youth in his dad's oversized attire, and in essence, he occupied my residence, expending my funds, all to sustain the facade of belonging. I stayed mute mostly, absorbing. My function that evening was evident to act as the kind, wordless elder, the base on which David and Sophia erected their sparkling existence. I donned a plain, ironed top and somber slacks, contrasting William's luxury coat. I ensured their vino vessels stayed full, rising to retrieve another container of the pricey Merlot I had acquired for the event. I removed the starter dishes and presented the primary dish, a roasted beef I had labored the whole afternoon to prepare. I performed it all with a subdued proficiency honed over years of tending my kin, of supplying without seeking recognition. It was what a parent, a partner, a welcomer did. It was a dialect of affection I had absorbed from Emily, a dialect of deeds, not phrases, but I was starting to grasp that to Sophia and her kin. It was a dialect they did not comprehend or opted to ignore. As I circled the board to replenish Margaret's vessel, she observed me with aloof interest, as if examining a fascinating device. She took a refined swallow of vino, then addressed Sophia, her tone resounding across the setup loud enough for all. "It must be incredibly handy," she remarked, patting her mouth with a cloth serviette. "Having constant assistance like this, it liberates so much of your schedule for the essential matters." The statement lingered briefly. The remark was seemingly praise for her offspring's way of life, but the undertone was obvious. She did not regard me as her offspring's in-law. She regarded me as personnel. I noticed David stiffen beside me. He parted his lips as if to amend her, a spark of fidelity in his gaze. But then he eyed Sophia, and the spark faded. He sealed his lips, took an anxious gulp of liquid, and voiced nothing. That prompted Sophia. She emitted a melodic chuckle, the sort she deployed at gatherings to brush off trifles. She laid her palm on her mother's limb, a sign of mutual elite insight. "Oh no, Mother," she stated, her tone vibrant and wholly nonchalant. "We lack personnel. That's merely Forrest." She halted, allowing the label to dangle, devoid of any relational honor. Then arrived the conclusive, lethal strike, given with a disregarding flick of her hand and a saccharine, patronizing grin. "He simply aids around here. You know, like the housekeeper." Quietude. It descended over the board not like a cover, but like a layer of frost. The mild tinkling of cutlery ceased. The murmur of dialogue evaporated. In that instant of utter immobility, all I heard was the frantic pounding of my pulse. I was immobilized, the hefty vino container in my grip abruptly weighing a ton. I saw David's complexion flush a profound crimson. His gaze fixed on his dish. His mandible tightened so firmly, I spotted the sinews quivering in his face. He was submerged in embarrassment. Yet he made no noise to rescue himself, much less me. Opposite. William's narrow mouth curved into a scarcely hidden sneer of delight. He had seen his offspring humble the elder, and he endorsed it. My stare, though, was fixed on Sophia. She encountered my gaze for a fraction of a second, and I detected no contrition, no hint of sorrow. All I perceived was the frigid, rigid sparkle of success. And then I averted my head and regarded my offspring. I regarded him, and the fury I anticipated was absent. It was supplanted by something far chillier and far weightier, a deep and endless disillusionment. It was the shattering insight of witnessing your offspring falter a basic trial of integrity, of propriety, of affection. The lad I had nurtured, the fellow I had sustained, was a timid soul. In that moment, Something within me that had flexed for years ultimately fractured. I did not elevate my tone. I did not create a spectacle. My actions grew gradual and intentional. I meticulously, and with an utterly stable grip, set the hefty Merlot container back on the board. The noise it produced was the sole sound in the space. Then I rose to my complete stature. I surveyed the board once more at the four visages gazing back, and I sensed an odd tranquility envelop me. The choice was finalized. The route ahead was evident. I creased my unused serviette and positioned it by my dish. "Pardon me," I articulated, my tone subdued, serene, and completely lacking sentiment. And with that, I turned away from them, from the repast I had prepared, from the offspring I scarcely knew, and I exited the eating area. The quietude I abandoned was more resounding than any dispute I might have ignited. I secured the portal to my office, and the noise, a mild, conclusive snap, appeared to divide the realm into dual segments. Beyond was the residence I no longer identified, brimming with the persistent strain of unvoiced terms and unpardonable slights. Within was my haven, the sole chamber Sophia had not yet ventured to alter. The atmosphere carried the odor of aged tomes, hide, and the subtle remnant aroma of the cigar blend I had not indulged in for ages. This was the core of the abode, the archive of my existence with Emily. And that night, it felt like the final stronghold of truth in a realm turned into an alert vision of disdain. I avoided the primary ceiling illumination. Instead, I activated the modest emerald desk lamp, projecting a cozy, concentrated beam on the deep oak. My form acted independently, settling into the acquainted ease of the faded hide seat. Behind the workstation, a chair bearing the subtle outline of my frame after innumerable hours of perusing, settling accounts, and devising a tomorrow that now appeared a remote tale. My palms were firm. My respiration was steady. The blazing rush of ire that had surged in me at the supper board had wholly dissipated, incinerated by the frigid, distinct jolt of treachery. Ire was ablaze, untamed and devouring. This sensation was distinct. It was the glacial composure succeeding a thunderbolt, the instant when you perceive the harm with flawless, terrifying distinctness. My gaze landed on the metallic frame at the workstation's edge. It contained an image of Emily captured on our 30th Union commemoration. She beamed, her crown tilted mildly, her orbs wrinkling at the borders with authentic delight that could illuminate a chamber. We stood in the yard, the one she had tenderly nurtured, the one Sophia now termed the lawn. I lifted the snapshot, the cool alloy a known heft in my palm. I peered into my spouse's beaming orbs and experienced a deep sense of shortfall. I had vowed to her, a mute oath on the day we interred her, that I would eternally safeguard our offspring. I believed that entailed provisioning for him, guaranteeing he possessed every edge, granting him the steadiness and safety I had toiled my whole existence to construct. But I perceived now that my provisioning had turned toxic. My liberality had not been viewed as a token of affection, but as a right, an infinite supply to be depleted. My quietude, which I had confused for tranquil forbearance, had been seen as frailty. It had been the nurturing soil where Sophia's haughtiness and David's timidity had flourished, coiling into a spiky tendril, now choking the essence of our kin. They were not merely slighting me. They were profaning this residence, this existence, the heritage that Emily and I had erected stone by stone, recollection by recollection. They had seized her volumes, her refuge, and substituted them with a display. They had seized her mate, her companion, and diminished him to a retainer. A resolution crystallized in my thoughts, not with a bang, but with the subdued, inexorable might of a continental shift deep under the soil. This concerned not vengeance. Vengeance was a chaotic, sentimental extravagance. This concerned reinstating harmony. This concerned repercussions. It concerned imparting a teaching that David, in all his seasons of costly schooling, had evidently never absorbed that every deed prompts a response. That esteem is a tender more precious than currency, and that you cannot presume a base without kindizing the downfall of the whole edifice. I positioned Emily's snapshot tenderly back on the workstation, orienting it toward me. I was no longer a casualty in my domain. I was its guardian. My actions grew purposeful, infused with a drive I had not sensed in eras. I arose and approached the barrier of racks, trailing my palm along the ridges until I located a dense hide-encased tome of classic plays. I drew it forth, and with a mild snap, a portion of the rack pivoted inward, unveiling the matte steel of a mural vault. I rotated the code dial, the known ticks resounding in the tranquil chamber. The sturdy latch released with a gratifying boom, and I tugged the metal portal ajar. Within lay no currency, no gems. There was solely parchment, but parchment I knew was the mightiest armament of all. I extracted the substantial file binders one after another and transported them to my workstation. I arrayed them beneath the cozy lamp glow, the initial title to the residence, endorsed in my designation, and Emily's 35 years prior, the fully settled loan certificate, the estate levy logs for the prior 15 years, the elaborate reports from my asset collections, the enterprise submissions for the venture I had vended, the origin of the riches they so heedlessly relished. It was all present. A lifespan of diligence, wise choices, and monetary autonomy exposed on the oak. This was the verity, this was actuality, and it was an actuality from which they had grown perilously separated. I settled, drew a fresh ivory legal sheet toward me, and grasped my preferred ink pen. The era of mute tolerance was concluded. The era for a mute, computed reply had just initiated. The firm of Thompson and Partners was not on an elevated level of a shiny urban tower. It occupied a splendidly renewed two-level townhouse, a structure evoking reliability, legacy, and subdued assurance. The inside mirrored this, laden with ebony timber ledges of hefty legal volumes and the muted, grave aura of a locale where crucial verdicts were rendered. Laura Thompson herself embodied this vibe. She was a lady in her mid-50s with keen, astute orbs behind timeless shell frames and gray tresses trimmed in a practical fashion. She had served as my counsel for over 15 years, managing the disposal of my venture, composing my testament, and establishing the fund for Emily. She was beyond a barrister. She was a relied-upon consultant, an intellect as exact and dependable as a precision timepiece. I faced her across a broad, orderly meeting board. I avoided commencing with the sentiment of the prior evening. I commenced with the realities. I narrated the years of mounting monetary requests, the gradual diminishment of my independence in my domain, and the progressive shift of my role from parent to funder. I informed her of the society membership, the substitution of Emily's volumes, and I concluded with a composed, thorough recount of the supper gathering. I reiterated Sophia's phrases precisely as she had voiced them. She labeled me the housekeeper. I permitted the terms to dangle in the serene air of her workspace. Laura heeded without disruption, her digits tented beneath her jaw, her stare unwavering on my visage. She was ingesting the data not as a companion would with empathy, but as a barrister would, pinpointing the crux of the matter. When I completed, she remained mute for an extended instant. Then she inclined her head gradually. "I comprehend," she articulated, her timbre balanced. "This is not an abrupt complaint, Forrest. This is the peak of a prolonged sequence of monetary and sentimental abuse." She pivoted to her machine, her digits tapping softly on the keys. Moments later, my complete fiscal existence appeared on the sizable display on the partition. "Let's examine the holdings at stake," she declared, her inflection moving from attentive to tactical scrutiny. Main dwelling at 15 Oak Lane. The ownership is in your designation, Forrest Anderson, and in the designation of the late Emily Anderson. The ownership is unblemished. There are no claims, no burdens, and no loan. The recent municipal valuation priced the asset at $1.5 million. She proceeded, emphasizing various entries on the display. Estate levies for the past 8 years have been settled promptly from your individual fund. All primary services, residence coverage, and major fixes, including the fresh siding in 2021, were also covered directly by you. Accurate, I affirmed. Accurate. She regarded me over her frame edges. And to clarify, this asset and its related expenses are wholly distinct from your chief asset collection, which is maintained in a modifiable fund. A fund where your offspring David is a recipient, but over which he holds no authority until your demise. That is also accurate, I verified. Laura reclined in her seat. Very well, she stated. The realities are solid. Now inform me, Forrest, what is your intended result? This was the pivotal inquiry. I desire them to possess the residence. I expressed, and I observed a glint of astonishment in her orbs. But I persisted. I desire them to comprehend its worth, not its commercial worth, but its genuine expense. I aim to safeguard the funds that Emily and I labored our entire existences to amass. I will not permit her heritage to be wasted by their presumption. Laura digested this, a gradual, contemplative grin expanding across her countenance. This was a challenge she could resolve. This was a riddle she could assemble. A refined goal, she whispered, returning to her display. Granting someone precisely what they crave is frequently the most potent instruction. There is a lawful and fiscal route to accomplish this. It's pristine, it's entirely legitimate, and it's unchangeable. She rotated the display for better visibility. The residence as it exists is an inactive holding. It's over $1 million in value merely resting there. The initial phase is to utilize that value. She indicated a segment on fiscal tools. You will request a residence value credit line or equity loan. Given your rating and the asset's worth, you'll be readily sanctioned for a line up to 80% of the dwelling's value. That's roughly $1,200,000. You will withdraw the full sum and place it into a fresh account in your designation solely. This is the paramount phase. The funds must be protected before any further action. She allowed that to absorb before advancing. Once the resources are securely yours, we advance to Phase 2. We will submit a release ownership document. It's a straightforward lawful paper. It conveys your stake in the asset directly to David and Sophia. It offers no assurances or commitments about the asset's state or any extant obligations against it. You are merely and lawfully relinquishing it. They will be the esteemed formal proprietors of a $1.5 million dwelling. She halted for emphasis, her acute orbs meeting mine. Now for Phase 3, the outcome. The $1,200,000 loan you secured is not bound to you individually. It is guaranteed by the asset itself. It's a claim that trails the ownership. So when the ownership shifts to them, the claim shifts along. They will obtain the entry to their ideal abode. And a few weeks on, they will obtain their initial loan notice. They will either settle it, or the lender will commence seizure actions and claim the residence. They will receive precisely what they desired, coupled with the duty they never pondered. I examined the scheme outlined before me. It was not a tool of wrath. It was a device of pure, frigid reasoning. It was an impeccably equilibrated measure, compelling them to gauge the authentic cost of their yearnings. It was an education in actuality, conveyed not with a yell, but with an endorsement on parchment. It was, as she had noted, refined. Laura, I articulated, my tone firm and resolute. That is an ideal resolution. Kindly prepare the required documents. Let's advance. The ensuing week was an exercise in subdued activity. There were no grand declarations, no theatrical clashes. The flows of my existence were altering. But externally, the surface stayed misleadingly tranquil. David and Sophia were occupied with their fresh society membership, their nights packed with communal commitments, and their days with a complacent radiance. They scarcely observed my arrivals and departures, and that aligned with my intent flawlessly. I traversed the residence like a specter, a mute watcher readying for his exit. My initial stop was the central outpost of a prominent lender, a frigid, detached shrine of trade with stone grounds and subdued murmurs. I was escorted into a transparent walled chamber where a youthful, keen credit agent offered me a bundle of forms nearly 2 inches dense. He clarified the conditions of the resident's value credit line with an expertly drilled address, indicating endorsement spots and initial areas. I attended patiently, though I already grasped every facet. My thoughts were not on his terms, but on the heft of the writing tool in my grasp. It was a basic roller, but it felt as ponderous as a magistrate's mallet. I commenced endorsing my endorsement. The one I had employed on myriad agreements and transactions, streamed onto the sheet, resolute and steady. Sheet after sheet. The identical 2 terms Forrest Anderson, a designation now being harnessed to reclaim its essence. I did not hasten. I perused the minute text, not from uncertainty, but from a profound comprehension that this was a pact with my own tomorrow. When the final sheet was endorsed, I propelled the bundle back across the buffed workstation. The young fellow grinned, relieved. He perceived a basic fiscal exchange. I perceived the initial twist of a latch in a mechanism that had rusted closed for eras. 3 days on, I returned to Laura Thompson's workspace. The ambiance here differed. It was not the frigid detachment of the lender, but the cozy, subdued honor of ancient timber and trusted advice. Laura skipped courtesies. She glided a solitary, misleadingly basic document across the meeting board. It was the release ownership document. My orbs scanned the juridical phrasing, the official clauses that would cut a 35-year tie, all my entitlement, ownership, and stake in the asset commonly recognized as 15 Oak Lane. Do hereby relinquish and eternally release claim. It was a juridical adieu, a formal release. I seized the writing tool. Laura proffered a substantial ink pen that seemed fitting for the moment. There was no delay. My endorsement on this paper was a conclusive gesture of liberation. I was not merely endorsing away a residence. I was endorsing away a load I had borne too long. Laura observed me, her countenance inscrutable but for a spark of profound regard in her orbs. She claimed the document, attached her certification stamp, and pressed firmly. The sharp, rhythmic noise of the imprinter marking the sheet was the only sound in the chamber. It felt like a judgment being issued. That night, I started assembling. Back at the residence, I proceeded with subdued intent. I did not assemble attire from the wardrobe or utensils from the galley. I lacked interest in the items Sophia had acquired, or the furnishings she had repositioned. My duty was to curate an existence to condense 35 years of devotion and recollection into a handful of modest cartons. I visited the office first. I delicately encased the metallic-framed image of Emily in gentle wrapping and positioned it at a carton's base, the bedrock. I descended to the chilly cellar and located the cartons of her volumes. I did not claim all. I selected 3 her frayed edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, an anthology of verses by Emily Dickinson, with her annotations in the borders, and a dense planting guide she had referenced every season. From my workstation, I took my dad's ancient silver timepiece and the ink pen I had used for the document. I packed my diaries, brimming with the subdued insights of a lengthy and satisfied existence. Each piece was a narrative, a fragment of an enigma that Sophia and David had never troubled to decipher. As I sealed the final carton, the noise tore through the residence's quiet. It was the noise of a conclusion and the noise of an inception. In an upstairs storage, I knew a fresh valise awaited. I had already leased a tidy, luminous unit in the urban core with a vista of the metropolis outline. Everything, utterly everything, was now aligned. I contacted them on Friday dawn. My tone over the line was composed and balanced, revealing none of the monumental alterations within me. I solicited their attendance for a kin assembly on Saturday noon. I employed the term assembly, a formal enterprise phrase deliberately misplaced for a kin dialogue. It was an indication that the former guidelines no longer pertained. I detected the intrigue and doubt in Sophia's tone, but they consented to attend. I'm certain they devoted the next day conjecturing, persuading themselves that my chilly exit from the supper gathering had jolted me into yielding that I was at last prepared to officially grant them the residence to cement my spot in their existences. Their avarice had perpetually rendered them foreseeable. They arrived at exactly 2:00. I awaited them in the lounge, the space that now resembled a platform. I had deactivated the massive display, its dark surface mirroring their warped forms as they entered. I sat in my aged seat, the one that had been Emily's preferred. It situated me facing the couch, forming a gap between us that felt both tangible and emblematic. They settled, their stance a blend of pretended worry and scarcely veiled expectation. Sophia positioned herself meticulously on the couch, straightening her costly gown. David merely appeared anxious, his orbs flitting about the space, dodging mine. "Appreciate your presence," I initiated, my tone subdued but resonant in the motionless air. "I've been contemplating extensively this past week about the horizon, about inheritance, and about this residence." At the reference to the residence, I observed them swap a swift, victorious peak. It was the expression of two individuals who thought their reward was imminent. Sophia inclined forward mildly, her countenance a veil of genuineness. "We were so concerned about you, Forrest," she expressed, her tone gentle. "We're pleased you're prepared to converse." I permitted her terms to dangle briefly before proceeding, disregarding the evident falsehood. "I've reached a resolution," I declared, "a resolution I believe benefits all." My motions were gradual, intentional. I inclined forward and set two objects on the buffed top of the low table dividing us. The first was a lone, gleaming copper entry to the main portal. The second was a dense, weighty beige envelope stuffed with papers. Their orbs were instantly drawn to the entry, a basic item symbolizing the supreme reward. "This residence," I articulated, my tone firm, "has been my abode for over 35 years. Emily and I forged a life here. But a residence is for the vibrant, for the horizon, and you two are the horizon of this kin." I halted, allowing them to ingest the gravity of my terms. And so, I wrapped up. "The residence is now yours." A brilliant, authentic grin erupted across Sophia's countenance. It was the initial sincere display I had witnessed from her in eras. She emitted a minor, triumphant chortle and extended across the table, grasping the entry. "Oh, Forrest," she exhaled, her orbs gleaming. "Thank you. We won't disappoint you. I knew you'd align with us." She clutched the entry in her grasp as if it were a valuable gem, already envisioning herself as the authentic lady of the estate. David appeared visibly eased, a surge of comfort washing his strained traits. "Dad, this is astounding," he faltered. They were so immersed in their success, they scarcely noted as I employed my forefinger to propel the dense beige envelope across the table toward them. "Naturally," I articulated, my inflection shifting from fatherly to pragmatic. As the fresh proprietors, there are a few protocols and duties you'll need to acknowledge. Sophia was still admiring the entry and scarcely attended. But David, ever the more wary, tentatively claimed the envelope. He unfastened the fastener and extracted the uppermost paper. I observed his countenance as he perused it. I saw the spark of bewilderment, the mild crease of his forehead as he attempted to process the figures. He examined the formal lender heading, then at the enormous numeral adjacent to amount owed. "What is this?" he queried, his tone a perplexed mutter. Sophia finally glanced over, her victorious look waning as she viewed the paper in David's grip. "A loan notice," she inquired, her tone sharp with incredulity. "That can't be correct. You cleared this residence before I was born." "That is accurate," I replied serenely. "I did. The residence was held outright, which rendered it such a prized holding." I reclined in my seat, my role in the tangible deed now fulfilled. It was time for the verity. Last week, I visited the lender and secured a fresh advance against the asset, a residence value mortgage for $1,200,000. The hue ebbed from Sophia's countenance. David appeared as if struck in the abdomen. "That funds," I proceeded, my tone distinct and exact, "has been moved into a personal retirement reserve in my designation only. It will guarantee I am fiscally stable for my remaining days without depending on anyone." After the resources were protected, I convened with Laura. I endorsed a release ownership document lawfully shifting the ownership of this asset and all its linked obligations to you two. David shook his cranium, rejecting comprehension. "But what does that signify?" It was Sophia who seized the frigid, harsh actuality first. Her tone was a terrified murmur. "The advance, the mortgage is bound to the residence." "Precisely," I confirmed. "The lender's claim trails the ownership, as the fresh lawful proprietors of this $1.5 million asset. You are also the esteemed owners of its $1,200,000 obligation." "This," I articulated, indicating the sheet in David's quivering grip, "is your initial monthly settlement, $9,000. It's due on the 1st of next month in 2 weeks. I trust you'll arrange accordingly." They sat in astonished, appalled quiet. The copper entry rested overlooked on the table amid them, its luster now appearing tawdry and derisive. I was not done. I extended into my coat compartment and drew several additional covers, positioning them on the table beside the mortgage notice, spreading them like a defeated set of cards. And naturally, there are the other expenses of residence ownership. This is the seasonal estate levy notice. That's just under $7,500. And here are the recent notices for power, liquid, and fuel. I've already reached the service providers to shift the accounts to your designations. My recurring settlements have been terminated. I finally arose. The assembly was concluded. I had voiced all that required voicing. I approached the hangar by the portal and donned my coat. I glanced back at them, two immobilized forms in a scene of demolished aspirations. They were encircled by the lovely items in my abode. Items they had yearned for so long, and they were at last starting to comprehend they were ensnared by them. I regarded the entry on the table one final time. "A proprietor has a duty to tend their asset," I articulated, my tone distinct and conclusive. "And as of today, the housekeeper is resigning." I pivoted, unlatched the main portal, and stepped into the mild afternoon breeze without glancing back. I abandoned them in the oppressive quiet of their fresh residence with naught but a valueless entry and a heap of notices that was now theirs to ascend. For an extended period after the main portal snapped shut, neither of us stirred. We were effigies in a gallery of our own downfall, fixed in the stances we occupied when the realm had terminated. The sole noise in the space was the subtle drone of the cooler from the galley, a ordinary sound that appeared indecent amid such utter ruin. The stack of sheets rested on the low table like a memorial heap. The copper entry sparkled under the noon sun. It was no longer an entry to a realm. It was the entry to a confinement. It was Sophia who shattered the quiet. Her tone was not a sob or a murmur. It was a low, poisonous sibilance, the noise of a serpent winding to attack. "Well," she articulated, her orbs locked on the portal my father had just traversed. "Aren't you going to act? Or are you just going to linger there as you always do?" I regarded her. Her countenance, usually so impeccably arranged, was a contorted veil of rage and disbelief. This was not the scheme. The scheme was the existence of seamless opulence of societies and Caribbean escapes, all financed by a subdued elder who knew his role. "Act," I finally articulated, my own tone sounding alien to my ears, slender and prepared. "What is there to act on? Sophia, did you not heed him? He's departed. The funds are departed." She leapt from the couch, her motions acute and fierce. "This is your blame," she screeched, directing a quivering digit at me. "Your blame. He is your parent. You were meant to oversee him. Instead, you just permitted him to pour you beverages while my folks were here. You just lingered and let me manage it. You feeble, gutless coward." The term coward hit me, and for the initial time in our bond, something within me fractured. The dread that had immobilized me for eras was abruptly scorched by a searing burst of fury. "Your blame," I bellowed, rising to confront her. "You believe this is my blame? I wasn't the one who labeled him the housekeeper. Sophia, that was you, all you. Was it worth it? Was that one minor instant of feeling exalted over my father worth all this?" I motioned wildly around the space at the furnishings she had selected, at the 75-inch display that had supplanted my mother's recollection. "This is what you craved, this residence, this way of life you urged, and you were too haughty and too covetous to ever consider he might just urge back." Her countenance paled with wrath. "Covetous," she ejected. "You label me covetous. Who was it that desired the fresh luxury sedan? Who was it that authorized the rental on a vehicle you knew we couldn't sustain? You adored the funds just as much as I did. David, the sole distinction is, I was prepared to do what it required to obtain it, while you were content to coast on your daddy's support." The harsh verity of her terms muted me briefly. She was correct. I had been a consenting participant, a mute associate in the gradual, steady draining of my father's kindness. The conflict ebbed from me, replaced by the frigid, heavy apprehension of our actuality. I collapsed back onto the couch, my cranium in my palms. The fury was gone, and only the horror lingered. I claimed the loan notice again, staring at the numeral, $9,000. It felt like an imaginary total from another cosmos. I performed the calculation, the basic, brutal math of our existences. My wage, which had always seemed substantial, was a farce against this. After our plastic debts, our dual vehicle settlements, and our absurdly lavish way of life, we were left with nearly zilch. We were existing on a fiscal precipice, and my father had just dislodged the foundation beneath our souls. "We can't settle this," I articulated, my tone empty. "Sophia, we can't settle it. We can't even cover the initial settlement." She was still upright, but the conflict had departed her as well. She surveyed the lovely, sun-illuminated lounge as if perceiving it anew. She saw the custom couch, the velvet drapes, the foreign carpet, but now she wasn't perceiving opulence. She was perceiving obligation. She was perceiving a periodic settlement that surpassed our joint earnings could conceivably handle. The lovely residence had morphed into a jail of debt, Every graceful element, every contemporary enhancement was just another grate on the pane. The existence she had so meticulously built was a fragile structure, and my father had just extracted the solitary element sustaining it all. She gradually sank onto the couch facing me, her form deflating. The battle was concluded. There was no one remaining to fault. There was only the frigid, harsh, inescapable verity. "So what do we do?" she murmured, the haughtiness wholly absent from her tone, supplanted by the slender, fragile noise of dread. I regarded the loan notice, then the seasonal levy notice, then the entry on the table. There was only one response. "We have to vend," I articulated. "We have to vend the residence." And we lingered there in the oppressive quiet, two outsiders in an abode that had never truly been ours. My fresh unit is tinier than the lounge of my former residence, but it feels boundlessly vaster. It is an area defined not by what it holds, but by what it misses. There is no strain, no unspoken bitterness, no sensation of being a visitor in my own existence. Daylight streams through a broad vista pane, lighting the neat contours of basic, practical furnishings and the specks twirling in the atmosphere. From here on the 10th level, the metropolis extends below me, a broad and complex chart of other existences, other narratives. It grants me a viewpoint I had forfeited. My few cherished cartons have been unpacked. Emily's snapshot holds honor on my workstation, her grin a perpetual warm attendance. Her preferred volumes rest on a modest, crafted ledge next to my perusing seat. These are the elements that count. The remainder, the costly furnishings, the vast chambers, the impeccably trimmed grass I do not yearn for at all. I had confused the container for the riches it was intended to contain. Now I possess the riches, and the container is another's issue. I devote my dawns in a condition of fruitful tranquility. I am not inactive. I am constructing something novel. Spread across my workstation are not notices or lender reports, but the lawful papers for founding a benevolent organization. The Emily Anderson Remembrance Grant. It will be titled, "It will supply resources for youthful, hopeful learners who wish to pursue environmental design, Emily's initial passion." The funds that I drew from the residents, the capital that had turned a fountain of such ugliness and avarice, will now be altered. It will become a nursery, sowing kernels of chance in the existences of outsiders, a heritage of expansion and allure that will tribute her far more than a vacant, mute residence ever could. The chime of my device sliced through the serene noon. I viewed the display and saw David's designation. A month had elapsed since the assembly, a month of absolute and total quiet. I felt no unease, no apprehension. I merely felt a subdued intrigue. I permitted it to chime once more, a minor declaration of my fresh life rhythm. And then I responded. "Hello, David," I articulated, my tone serene. I attended. His tone on the opposite end was slender, tense, devoid of all its prior assurance. It was the tone of a fellow who had reached nadir. I attended his faltering clarifications, his catalogue of troubles, his discourse of property brokers and undervalued bids, and the oppressive burden of obligation. I did not disrupt. I just attended the foreseeable, unavoidable outcomes of his choices. There was a lengthy, agonizing halt on his side, and then came the inquiry I knew was approaching, a desperate, garbled appeal for aid, for a rescue, for me to mend the chaos they had wrought. I inhaled deeply, gazing out the pane at the boundless firmament. "I comprehend," I articulated, my tone mild but resolute. "It sounds like you are in a very challenging spot." I permitted another quiet to extend, compelling him to ingest the conclusiveness of his circumstance. And then I delivered him my response, the one that would shape our bond from this day onward. "Yes, son," I articulated, "my portal is always ajar to you, but this time you will enter as a visitor, not as a proprietor. I heard an unsteady inhalation on the opposite end, the noise of a fellow finally grasping the fresh guidelines of the realm. After an instant, I voiced my farewells and terminated the exchange. I did not feel exultant. I did not feel a rush of triumph. The fulfillment I sensed was deeper, quieter, more significant. I stood at the pane, observing the distant stream of vehicles, the ceaseless motion of the metropolis. What I had accomplished was not a deed of vengeance. Vengeance is a blaze that devours the wielder. This had been a deed of reinstatement. It was like discovering a lovely ancient timepiece that was indicating the incorrect hour, and instead of demolishing it, I had simply unlatched it cautiously, cleansed the mechanisms, and adjusted the pointers to the proper time. I had recalibrated the ethical guide of my own kin. I had not ruined my offspring. I had granted him the chance, however agonizing, to finally become a fellow, to stand independently and confront the outcomes of his deeds. I had shielded Emily's heritage, altering it from a fountain of presumption into a power for benevolence. And I had reclaimed my own honor, not by yelling, but by rendering a subdued, intentional choice. Harmony had been reinstated, and in that reinstatement, I had finally discovered my tranquility. This narrative imparted to me a deep teaching. Tranquility bought with honor is no tranquility whatsoever. For eras, I endured disdain, believing my quiet was maintaining kin accord. I was mistaken. My quiet was not a barrier. It was a nourisher permitting presumption to flourish where appreciation should have been. The toughest teaching was realizing that sometimes the most affectionate deed is to generate an essential clash. Establishing firm limits is not about erecting barriers, but about instructing others the worth of the portal. True fortitude isn't found in bearing endless disdain. It's found in serenely and resolutely instructing others how you merit to be treated. What did you think of the teaching Sophia and David learned? Share your thoughts below. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.